I'm not a technical person. I'm not an entrepreneur. I don't run a business. I have three principal hats which intersect frequently. I have some other smaller hats, and that's one as a parliamentarian, one as a person who deals with the press every day, and one, of course, in my professional capacity as a lawyer. And I can start by saying unhesitatingly that new or old media, if you ask yourselves the question, and partly a lot of us, especially those who are from India, because we live here for the last few decades, and we've lived through this era, we don't notice the change. But if each one of us was to ask ourselves the question, what single most important thing has changed in our lives in the last 2 decades? Obviously the answer is old or new. It's the media. That's point one. And that, of course, is particularly true of all the three hats with which I operate every day: the press, the parliament, and of course my legal profession. The second aspect is that there is always many Indias in one. There is a syndrome of many Indias in one, in our economy, in our industry, in our prosperity. And likewise, there is the good, bad, and the indifferent. And there are lots of things which are wrong. But if you take an overall picture, a holistic picture, a broad view standing apart, it's mostly been for the good. And we should thank ourselves and we should pat ourselves on the back. Not because of governmental effort, not because necessarily of any individual institutional effort, but it's just happened like that, and ultimately it's happened because of the innate entrepreneurial skills and the curiosities and the innovations of the average Indian. Today, just consider, I mean, I'm from public life, so take the public life domain first, and this really applies both to the traditional media and to the new media. You have this great assertion of rights. You have this great festival of democracy. You have this great participation from the trivial, from the divine to the comic, from the big to the small in every public issue. Whether it is the serious, the extremely serious, the candlelight after the Mumbai terror, whether it is this feeling of unity and oneness irrespective of caste, color, creed and politics after the Mumbai incident, whether it is the SMSs with which you respond every day on your TV screens, and they are not meant to be surveys on which you will give your ABC ratings or your advertisement revenues, but they certainly indicate the mood of the moment in some broad sense. Or whether it is a whole host of other things, it is all ultimately because of the new and or the old media. Take transparency. Our lives have changed almost unnoticeably. We are a far more transparent nation even before RTI, even before the Right to Information Act. The Right to Information Act, I always say, is a provision of a facilitative legal framework for really carrying on the transparency story. But the internet itself and all the attendant 15, 20 various media, whether you call it all the technology you have, that really has made us into a tremendously transparent society. Today, the politician, the public life, the public figure, the press person, whichever side, is both in a sense more inherently accountable, also more cautious, and also in a sense more rounded, because he knows there is a very special ankush not only of the press is always there, but of a particular weapon which is there in the press, the media, the old and the new technology of the media. So I think it's a very fascinating story, and it's just so large that really neither this topic nor this panel can really encompass all the facets of it. Now, therefore, that's mostly for the good. The trend, the thrust, the overall picture is good. There are, of course, lots of bad things. Lots of things we have to, discuss. We've discussed the sense of it, but there's a lot of sensation to it and a lot of nonsense to it as well. It's the sensation and the nonsense of it which is the bad part of it. I'm reminded, I'm giving an example from the old media, but it could as well have been from the new media. About a year ago, on a Sunday evening, I was slightly unwell, but I was at Taj, in fact this hotel, in a conference, not at a speaking conference, at a legal conference here. And I got a call from a particular channel I'll not name, saying we are about to have an expose, a sting operation at 8 o'clock, and we'd like you very much, Dr. Singhvi, to react. And I said, what is it about? He said, no, our policy on sting is that we tell you just 15 minutes before the sting. We can't tell you before, because otherwise our exclusivity is lost. Some sixth sense, and I said no, I was free, but I was feeling slightly under the weather. I said no. And at 8 o'clock, out of curiosity, I watched, and I saw this thin, frail man with a banyan protesting wildly, saying, it's not my voice, it's not this. And they were showing that this man allegedly had spoken to a criminal in a jail in UP. And they were playing the tape again and again. And it was a prominent channel. And then they went round with the mic to all the NGOs and all the famous people, and everybody had a view, and they bashed this small man. I didn't even know the man. I discovered next morning in Parliament that he was our Minister of State for Home, a tribal Minister of State for Home for the country, central government, a tribal who has won elections 9 times from Maharashtra, but a man who could speak fluently in Marathi, pretty broken Hindi, forget English. His English is very bad. He doesn't relate to your and my sense of 5-star culture or sitting. Went into Parliament, and when I went in, I found a group of Marathi politicians from across the political divide, and I said, क्या हो रहा है आपके स्टेट से ये हुआ है, क्या सच्चाई है इसमें? उनका, Abhishek ji, you don't know who this is? He could never have said this. It's not him at all. We can vouch for it. And then I went into Parliament and I saw the most touching scene. I saw a member of the opposition get up and say, before the speaker could open, before everybody could bash this poor man who had been bashed for 3 hours the previous night, the opposition got up and said, we give a clean chit to Mr. Gavitt. He could never have said it. This is not his voice. This is not his accent. We've been on parliamentary delegations with him. This is just pure fiction. Now this is it's just an example of the raw power of the media. It just happens that Gavitt is a person with a particular accent, with a particular ability and facility in a particular language, and he could not have done what he was alleged to have done. But look at the immense power of the media. That's why they say the power of the press is nothing compared to the power to suppress. And it's really an enormous power both ways, the direct power and the negative power as well. I think that applies to all technology, new technology, and I think as we go along with the questions, there are so many facets to this I'd like to discuss, but perhaps if time permits.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned that in the last 2 decades, one great change is the media. And I think another, perhaps equally great change is communications, how communications have changed. India has today is home to 350 million mobiles, growing at 8 or 10 million per month. And yet, we have the paradox that we don't have 3G, we have questionable use of spectrum, which after all is a public good, which is not evidently being managed terribly well. We have very poor penetration of the internet, which means that the capacity to leapfrog to more advanced usage of mobiles, of connectivity, of congruence of different technologies is kind of being held back. Any thoughts on this? Would anyone like to take up this issue or take up any of the issues that you have all thrown up in your initial remarks? I'll start with Govind, perhaps.
Yeah. No, I think there are 2 parts to it. One is, of course, the discussion on media and its behavior and so on. I think that's a very large, and we've got another panel tomorrow, which I'm sure is going to end up in some fair amount of electronic TV bashing, so which is good, perhaps also required at this point. What I really want to come back to is the 3 points that I talked about earlier. I said, where does technology come in? And if we are talking about empowering the youth, how do we really empower them? Radio and television are one-way devices. I mean, to a large extent, television has also been and very sort of used in education by the government, and it's some fairly pioneering projects there. I think the next level is to use the internet and the abilities of the internet to disseminate information and communicate with a large number of people and receive their inputs. And I think you're part of an internet teaching project as well, as you were telling us earlier. So it's, and in your case, maybe it's a cross-border, but I'm talking about really doing it within India. So if I were to say focus on the next big challenge, I think all of what we're saying in the media context is in the information domain, right? It's to do with information, quality of information generated by independent bloggers, information generated by organized media, which maybe I belong to or Jahangir belongs to, information generated by other people who have an interest in a certain subject. It could be cookery and communicating insights into cookery, or maybe astronomy. So that's all comes under the sort of gamut of information. Then I talked about transaction, and I said that's a big thing for India, because suddenly you're able to execute transactions, bring down the cost of transactions in both financial, particularly financial, and even if you see the whole sort of the controversy on travel agent commissions between the airlines and the travel agencies, because there's something called with a big I called the internet, which is sort of hanging there and bringing down the cost. So which is good for the people. Exactly. So the third, to my mind, and the challenge is really education, and how do we crack this one? And I think the more we put our minds to it, And the more we find interesting people and solutions, we'll have found fundamental solutions to our problems of education and education dissemination, which is why what I would think an Ideas Festival could focus on.